Hi, everybody. My name is Matty Manley, and I am a mom of a little boy that has congenital muscular dystrophy, and we live in Spokane, Washington. And my good friend and podcast co-host is here with me. Hi, Megan.
Hello, how are you?
I am good tonight. I'm really excited to do this with everybody.
Me too.
So,
I also have a kiddo with congenital muscular dystrophy. Her name's Lily, and she's 7, and we live in Iowa. So we do this remotely with each other, which is why we are side by side and not literally side by side doing this.
yes. So Megan and I met in 2017, the summer of 2017, in person, but we had met online in January of
2016.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, 16. Sorry, guys. 2016, because my son Matthew had just been diagnosed with congenital muscular dystrophy, and Megan was in a support group on Facebook because of her daughter Lily. So we had met then, and then we got the opportunity to meet in Virginia in July of 2017 in person. And I think our friendship from there has just kind of grown, and we've seen each other a handful of times in person since then, which is awesome.
Maybe we should back up a minute and describe what congenital muscular dystrophy is, and then we can talk about how we advocate for it, and then ultimately how we started a podcast about it.
Sounds good.
So congenital muscular dystrophy is one of over 7,000 rare diseases of which there is no cure. It is a neuromuscular disorder that originates at or soon after birth, and most that are affected have various life-threatening symptoms, including cardiac involvement, breathing involvement, mobility issues, nutrition, scoliosis. Our kids specifically are affected by the breathing aspect, the nutrition, some mobility. My daughter has started scoliosis, so she will need spinal surgery sometime in her teens. Mostly breathing.
Mm-hmm. At the age of 2, right after Matthew was diagnosed, he soon started his BiPAP at night, and he's been on it ever since, and he'll always have his BiPAP for the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm.
But the breathing issues start very early on for our kiddos. So,
because our kiddos have impaired respiratory function, if they catch the most minor of bugs that go around, they tend to take hold longer, quicker, and more severe, and it becomes a really big issue. So we do a lot of hand hygiene here, and making sure that we're all trying to be conscientious of keeping the entire family healthy in order to keep the kiddo with congenital muscular dystrophy, or CMD, healthy. You'll hear us say CMD throughout this.
Yeah, so a little bit about our diagnostic journey and ourselves. I am married to a wonderful husband, Luke. We have a 7-year-old daughter, Miranda. Matthew, our kiddo with CMD, is 5, and my youngest is Joshua, and he is 3. Matthew, we knew something was going on within the first 3 months of his life. He was super tiny. He was floppy baby. He struggled to eat. All kinds of stuff that ended up landing us in the hospital for some virus that just knocked his system down, where we ended up with a feeding tube. And our journey from there kind of went forward going, okay, there's something else going on in this little guy's body. So we had lots of testing over the 2 years, lots of doctors, specialists, all of it, traveling. And then we came to the diagnosis of congenital muscular dystrophy, subtype SEPN1, just after he turned 2 years old. So we've had our diagnosis for 3 years now. And yeah, that's kind of where we ended up, and then found Megan and her family and several other families online that also have CMD in their families.
Let's see, Lily first started showing symptoms, if we really tracked back shortly after birth. We didn't quite know it. We started figuring things out about 6 months old because she couldn't hold her head up well. Floppy would probably be the best way to describe her. And she was starting to miss milestones. So between about 6 months old to 11 months old, we were doing just some local specialists to determine what was going on. Ended up with a referral to a children's hospital neurologist. He started doing testing, really quickly raked up a lot of medical testing bills with that individual. Ultimately ended up being referred across the state to a neuromuscular physician. Upon walking in her door within 10 minutes, she was like, yes, this is a type of muscular dystrophy, and it is, in my opinion, this, or this. It ended up being the 5th thing on her list. So even once we got to her, it was about a year and a half after we got to her, that she finally got the correct genetic test. So all in all, we were about 3.5 years and $35,000 in medical debt to get to diagnosis. And from what we now know with other CMD families, 3.5 years is a short diagnostic odyssey, which to us is just simply astonishing because 3.5 years was a lifetime. But there are other families that go, I heard of a family the other day that went 20 years with undiagnoses or missed diagnoses. So 3.5 years was long to us, but short to others. But $35,000 in medical debt for us was crippling. We, at one point, were considering medical bankruptcy or selling our house in order to pay off the medical bills. And so we ultimately sold our house and moved across the state to have better access to medical care for her. And then with the profit of the house, paid off the medical bills and started over, which is a hard reality for some families, but it's a reality.
Especially in our community, I feel like, in special needs and rare disease community, it's something more people face than not.
So she was diagnosed officially, let's see, it was August of 2014. We got the diagnosis on the date of our wedding anniversary, which is a little bit ironic because it's a genetic diagnosis that she inherited from both of us. So irony is our life sometimes. So we are a little bit short of 5 years of diagnosis now.
And some day-to-day things that I know, or day-to-day, week-to-week things that our kids deal with are BiPAP. I know Matthew has dietary restrictions. He can't tolerate a lot of foods, and foods have to be easily chewable because of muscle weakness and swallowing. We have therapy appointments and several durable medical equipment pieces in our homes, probably like most of you guys do.
We too have BiPAP. We have a wheelchair that Lily uses to go distances, and the footprint of her school is big, so she uses the wheelchair for transportation at school. Once she gets to the classroom, then she gets out and moves about. Beyond the BiPAP, we also have 4 other pieces of respiratory equipment that we use when she gets sick. So when she gets sick, we pull it all out and we look like a hospital, and we become her nurse and her respiratory therapist and her tutors because we're doing homework at home while she's sick. Daily dietary is a big thing because soft food diet is basically what she'll tolerate. She drinks a lot of her calories, again, because of the ability to chew foods, so she can drink them easier. And the hygiene thing that we talked about, the hand hygiene thing, trying to prevent illnesses, is the daily thing. She has an IEP at school. She has a state waiver and Medicaid. So those are not daily, but they are definitely maintenance items that we need to keep up throughout the year.
Here.
Yep.
We deal with those too.
No,
Megan and I had heard about Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and thought that we would enjoy the week away and go do some advocacy and kind of learn about what was going on legislative-wise for the rare disease community. So February 2018, we both hopped on planes and headed to D.C., had an amazing time meeting so many people with rare diseases, whether they were affected individuals, parents, siblings, children, the whole gamut pretty much of people impacted by rare disease in some way.
We learned about how connecting your community within your own community is one of the best ways to get things to bubble up in your community and make the most use of your advocacy voices. So we had a stressful yet exciting way back home because there was nor'easter coming through and we couldn't quite get back home the day we were intending to get back home.
Mm-hmm.
So we unintentionally added an extra day to our trip, added an extra leg of travel to our trip, added some extra stress to our trip. And through all of this, Matty and I started listening to some other podcasts, and during the week had brainstormed of different varieties and ideas, methods that we could do to help cure CMD, which is the patient advocacy group that we volunteer for, different ways that we could help them. And when we came to the end of the stressful travel day, we looked at each other and said, we have a voice, we have the ability to connect other people together, we have the ability to connect our united voices together. What can we do? And so I looked at her and I said, Matty, let's start a podcast. And she looked at me like I was crazy.
Well, I also had not slept in like 29 hours at that point.
True that.
And drove through a nor'easter through a mountain pass.
True that.
So it was a little chaotic, lack of sleep. And I was like,
the lack of sleep might have helped me.
I think it did.
She looked at me like I was crazy, but then she went, okay.
Yeah. And on an escalator in Atlanta, Georgia, 2 rare mama bears was kind of born.
Well, the idea of a podcast was born.
Yeah.
And then I went off to my respective gate, waited for my plane, and she went off to her respective gate and waited for her plane. And then like literally 40 minutes later, she's texting me the most brilliant idea ever and saying we should call it 2 Rare Mama Bears. How she can be that creative with such a lack of sleep, I don't know, but
was inspired.
She did.
That was good.
So then we got back home and started laying the plans. And by May of 18, the podcast was up and going.
Mm-hmm. So we chat a couple times a month and do episodes and talk about what's going on in the CMD community, what's going on in the rare disease community, how it impacts our families on a daily basis, how it impacts us as moms. And
yeah, so the podcast, the original intent and the ongoing intent is to bring together affected individuals, their families, researchers, clinicians, industry, policymakers, to all have conversations with the goal of moving the needle on the mission of cure CMD and rare disease.
Mm-hmm. And part of that came from one of the biggest things that we found when we were newly diagnosed was finding that community. And if there's anything that we could share with new families that are diagnosed with a rare disease or have special needs, is finding that community within your subtypes and your groups so that you're not alone. Because a lot of times I feel like rare disease and special needs is very isolating. And everything, every aspect of life. And so that was super important to us, and we wanted to help move that for other families also.
Yeah. I would say one of the things that I picked up early on after diagnosis, and then I see other families that are newly diagnosed find strength in, is establishing their care teams with their various subspecialists and making sure that those specialists communicate together as like a multidisciplinary team. And the communication together is key. Mm-hmm. So if you're a newly diagnosed family and you're not pushing for that communication to have your physicians talking to each other, make sure they're talking to each other and that you're not having to be the hub and that they're the spokes. Mm-hmm. Make sure they are the hub talking to each other.
Yeah. Agreed.
One quick thing, I think, before we get into a little bit of the meat of the rest of this, is that even before the idea of this podcast was born, when we were on Capitol Hill in February of 2018, Maddie was hashtagging everything that she did with "failure is not an option." Mm-hmm. So that has been her prevailing personal tagline. And I think the more you listen to Maddie and you follow Maddie, you will realize that that is truly her personal tagline.
Thanks. Yeah. We definitely learned that both of us have that tagline, and it heads in exactly the same direction. Megan says, "Leave no stone unturned," which is, for me as a visual person, is very impactful because it is seriously looking and looking until there is nowhere left to look. And I love that because it just gives such an amazing visual idea of how hard Megan works and pushes forward for Lily and for all the other families affected by rare disease.
And maybe because I'm a little bit relentless.
Which I love. Yeah. Love it. So in all of this, one thing about our story with the podcast is it has changed so much for me as a person and how I feel about myself. Because I know initially with rare disease, or with Matthew's diagnosis, and I feel like this is probably for a lot of parents that go through a diagnostic odyssey or learning of special needs for their child, the ups and downs are intense and emotional. And sometimes I feel like we can lose ourselves and who we are in trying to care for our kids. And I definitely went full bore into that because that's who I am as a person partially. And it was like, well, failure's not an option. We have to figure out what's going on and make everything the best we possibly can. And in a lot of that, I forgot taking care of myself. And I think I've told Megan before, it's like when our planes were supposed to separate that first day and go different ways, all of a sudden we had this storm. And then we were spending 5 hours in a car driving through a storm to get to an airport that we could fly out the next morning. And then my flight was canceled in the middle of the night. So I couldn't even fly out of the same airport as Megan. So then I had to drive through a mountain pass in Pennsylvania in the middle of the storm, in the middle of the night, to get to another hotel or another airport.
In the smallest car ever.
In like the smallest non-snow tired car in the world. It was horrible. But me leaving from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Megan leaving from Allentown, Pennsylvania, we both ended up in Atlanta, Georgia. And we're like, well, let's have breakfast since now we're heading there. And that's where this came from. And I know for me, it's been such a blessing that I didn't know I needed. I got to do something impactful that wasn't just about me or wasn't just about Matthew, but I really found my voice and my strength again through the podcast, through the advocacy work Megan and I have been doing, and our involvement with Cure CMD. And I don't think there's any other way for me, but very Holy Spirit led, that's where we ended up. And then Megan had this idea, and we had the opportunity to be in person again to do it. Because if you had asked me on the phone, I probably would have said no. But we didn't. She asked me in person, and I said yes. So here we are now, right? Almost a year later, and I can't even explain the blessings that the podcast and the community that we've met has been for me individually, that then I have been able to pass on to my family and my local community and be able to share. So this has been a huge blessing for me in the kind of loneliness that being a parent of a special needs kid can have. So I grew up Catholic. I was cradle Catholic and went to Catholic school. I worked in youth ministry after high school, and when Luke and I got married, and still were involved in youth ministry early on when we had kids. And my faith was, we were there on Sundays. We helped do this. I felt like I was, fairly below the surface, and that things were good. Like I liked being Catholic. I liked my faith, all of that. And I didn't realize how hard a diagnosis would hit my spirituality and my faith life. And I think that impacts a lot of us when we get news that our children aren't going to have the lives that we kind of envisioned in our heads, that things are going to be different and we have to readjust our expectations. And so for a lot of it, I was wanting somebody to say, we got you. This is good. Because I loved our community, and I guess I expected that out of our community. And I felt kind of dropped and alone with that. And so I got to a point with Matthew's diagnosis, and I'm grateful for my husband that I said, I'm not going anymore. I don't want to go. I am way too tired, and this is not something that's filling my cup up. This is not something that is helping. It is just one more thing in my day that I have to take care of or get ready for, and I have to get 3 kids ready for. So if you want to go to church, you can go to church. Because it wasn't necessarily that I was angry at God for our diagnosis. I was angry that I felt like I had to do all of it all by myself, and nobody was going to help us. Nobody was going to step up, and I didn't feel the overwhelming love that I had wanted to initially. And I think that it took me a long time to realize that I couldn't do that all on my own, and that maybe I needed to ask that community that I wanted to reach out, say that, no, I need help. Because that habit of saying, I got it, I'm fine, we're fine, we're handling it.
I got it.
And so it was about a year after Matthew's diagnosis that I finally said to my group, or my husband actually sent me to a women's group and said, I think this is what you need, and I want you to go. And I fought, kicking and screaming, because there were plenty of things that I needed to get done at home and take care of versus go out and drive across town and spend time with these women that I didn't know and probably didn't want to know, when I could be at home being productive. But then I was embraced by a beautiful group, beautiful community in our kind of tri-parish area that helped kind of bring me back in. And that's been good, between the podcast and having community here in town that knows what's going on and may not be able to relate but is willing to listen, I guess, has been spiritually a big thing for me.
My faith journey has been dissimilar than yours. I was raised Lutheran, Missouri Synod, which is the more conservative type of Lutheranism. I was raised in the church, and early adulthood was in the church. Married there, and my kids were baptized in church. My husband was not raised in the church, but joined when we got married. He made a good effort to go with me to church in the first part of our marriage. I say he and I because we made the effort together, but it was not in his nature. That's why I say he. And then at the time of us starting to figure out something was happening with Lily, we were very, very busy in our jobs, and we were frequently on the road traveling for her medical tests. So church easily became a back burner item. Even if it wasn't our intent, it just did. And then came the move, and we moved across the state, as I mentioned, for better healthcare, access to healthcare for her. And when we moved, we church shopped, and it took a number of churches to find one that we were comfortable in. We did. And we disclosed to the pastor what was happening with Lily. And she was diagnosed a month after we joined the church. And he was in the loop right away. I think I was popping him an email maybe a week later. So he knew. And then 6 months later, my brother died. He had a line of duty death as a volunteer firefighter. And again, the pastor knew right away because we were supposed to be volunteering in the church that weekend because it happened on a Thursday night. And so we were driving back home to the other side of the state on Friday. And we were supposed to be, both of us were supposed to be volunteering in the church that weekend. So obviously we had to bail out on the volunteering. And so he knew just from us emailing saying, we can't go, we won't be there because. So when I needed to be embraced because of life, it didn't happen. And that hurt. So the honest truth is, since both of those items happened, I haven't gone back. So I am spiritual, but I'm not practicing. If I'm totally honest, I would say I am still in a place that I am mad at God for my brother's death. Probably because I heard at least half a dozen times that God only takes the good ones to heaven. And I think that's bupkis. He was 42. We need him here. His kids need him here. So I'm probably still in a place where I'm mad about that. So I'm probably more mad at God about my brother's death than I am about her diagnosis. But wrap the whole year together, and it just does not have me in a place where I felt embraced. I still believe in higher power, but I can't get myself to a place where I want to sit in a church willingly.
Unless, of course, you're with me.
I do go with Matty.
She goes to the Basilica with me when we go to DC.
Because I'm a supportive friend.
She is.
And as a former wedding photographer, have shot literally hundreds of weddings, many of them being Catholic. Man, I know the ins and outs of a Catholic service probably better than ins and outs of a Lutheran service at this point. So I've obviously gone since since this has all happened, but it's an odd place for me because this is not where I was growing up, and it's not where I have been for 35 years of my life. That's where I'm at right now.
I think for me, adding even where I thought I was like I was good in my faith, and then having an upset with diagnosis impacted me harder than I believed that it would have. And so having two major things in 6 months, I think would shake anybody quite a bit.
Yeah, there was another death in there too. My dad died later the same year. Yeah. But that was more of a release because that was not a healthy relationship. But the person I wanted to talk to the most was my brother, because he understood it and I couldn't. And again, I was just back to mad. I'd like to say at some point I can get past the hard mourning of all of it, but 2014 into 15 was just rough, and I'm still reliving all of it.
And each thing has its own time.
Yeah. So the podcast probably came for me at a time when I needed an outlet, when I was maybe enough removed from the trauma that was 14 and 15. I was, a good year and a half removed from it, that I could talk about it without crying, that I could talk about diagnosis without crying. So the podcast for me came at a time that was cathartic.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the podcast is my church.
I think it's definitely a blessing for both of us.
In our own way.
It was something that, in a way we didn't know we needed.
There you go. We know now.
We know now. And now we get to share our story and hopefully connect other people that have similar stories or have gone through similar paths with each other, so that people maybe don't feel so isolated, not embraced, like they're having to do it all on their own.
So to end this, should we do special needs parent fell in a hole?
Sure.
So this is a JPEG that floated around social media for a while that really struck a chord with Matty and I. Because when you read through it and you really think about it, as a special needs parent or a medically fragile parent, 100% hits home, where you go, oh, yes, yep, that's us. And so we did this as an episode on the podcast, and it had overwhelming support from our listeners, that they were like, yes, that was like, I was listening to it while I was out for a run and was screaming yes while I was running, and people thought I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll call this, even though in the time we recorded it, it sounded like we were on a bit of a rant, we will call this one of our hallmark mantras, if you will.
Agreed. So. A special needs parent fell in a hole.
Family member.
What hole?
Boss.
Oh, that's a shame. You can take the day off.
Just what you need, a day off. Doctor.
Can you keep a diary of your experiences in the hole?
Okay, so while you're down there in the hole, please, can we add more burden on top of you? And we need you to document it, just so that we believe you. Department of Human Services.
We will assess the size of the hole. However, it may take up to 18 months.
Okay, so we need to put a number on the size of how deep you're down in the hole. And there's a waiting list. So sorry for you. Local authority.
Sorry, we don't have enough money for a ladder.
Oh, well, we want to help you out of that hole, but we don't have enough money to help you out of the hole.
Mm-hmm.
A local charity.
Here's a form. Fill it in to apply to get on the waiting list for a ladder.
So here is some work. Give us all your information. Then we'll put you on the waiting list to potentially help you out of the hole that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, another special needs parent.
I'm here. I'm coming down there with you. I've been in here before and I know how to get out. And I won't let you do it alone.
So that last one is what the podcast is all about.
Mm-hmm. Is that we know that there's a hole and it's dark and sometimes cold, but we don't want you to be down there alone at all.
Yep. So final thing, one last JPEG that was also floating around social media that we thought was totally fitting that we will end on is Mama. You were given these children, you, no one else. You were given these children because you are who they need. You have the soul to love them even on their hard days. You have the motivation and the love to give these children everything they need. You have the heart to wake up every morning and do it all over again, even when you're exhausted. You have the smile that they crave and the touch to make everything okay. You are their sunshine and their comfort. You are theirs and they are yours, Mama. On the days you are questioning yourself, remember, you got this.
Thank you, everybody, for popping in and sharing your time with us. We are Two Rare Mama Bears.
Find us on www.curecmd.org/podcast.